protection, because I don't believe in it. I've always been gay. You know, I'm what they might call a gold star lesbian. I've only slept with guys a couple times accidentally, which is another story. But I've never fallen in love with a guy. It was always women. I didn't face it, you know, really until college, because I just, you know, and probably ran away from it a little bit. I really thought the only thing I'm interested in is my work, dancing. I didn't know really what type of movement I was pursuing. I just knew that was my life. I didn't really start living with a woman till Laura Flanders, till I was 41, 42. I really didn't live with anyone. I had affairs. I had serious relationships with one woman for 10 years, but she was bisexual, you know, so I was still experiencing and exercising homophobia on a certain level. Even though I truly loved her, I was, you know, not really gay because, of course, I'm with straight women. And so I had a very, very, not rocky, but mixed up journey towards actually the moment or the period where I felt comfortable coming out. I think this is the best time in my career. But had you asked me that at any other point, I probably would have answered the same. I just think of myself as loving what I do, so I'm lucky because I'm still doing it. I'm still able day to day to do it. It seems like an impossible dream to me.
Coming out, it's a life-changing journey for many people. But what happens inside a family once the secret is revealed? Dan Fishback came out to his family at age 15, and he didn't have a clue how they would react to his news. In our next segment, we meet the Fishbacks 9 years after they first learned that their youngest son was gay.
Plus it gives you more dishes to watch. Shall I? Brett?
Yeah.
What do you whisper to me?
That's because Dad doesn't usually.
Make-believe games were really important for me when I was growing up because it was pretty much all I could do. I identified a lot with Wonder Woman because she was sent from a place where everyone was like her to a place where everyone was stupid and brutish and butch and dumb and male. And then she was really girly, and it was her job to like save man from manhood. And I could appreciate that at like 5. I just spent a lot of time alone when I was younger. My brother didn't really usually want to play with me. I think I relied on my imagination more when I was going through puberty than when I was a really young child. If I didn't have an imagination, I wouldn't have had anything.
Dan was very quiet. We never really noticed how quiet he was. Michael went off to middle school. Michael was a superstar. Daniel, on the other hand, had a very hard time in middle school and would come home with stories of being harassed on the school bus. And I kept saying, Dan, don't be a victim. You look like a victim. And I kept saying, you have to stand up
tall,
and straight and, you know, and be tough. And he was soft. And he would say, you know, he got beaten up. And I was not as sympathetic as I should have been.
I would go to school and I would run to the bathroom. I felt so scared and sick to just be in that place. You know, I wanted to kill myself, quite bluntly. I wasn't happy ever when I was that age. When there's no place for you in the world, you don't really interact with the world very much, and you retreat into yourself and you fantasize and you just have your imagination. I just think a lot of gay men haven't yet learned how to be in the world because so many of us have had to retreat into our imaginations for so long.
I don't have stage fright, I have off stage fright, I have off stage fright, I have off stage
fright. I was already out to some close friends. I was planning on coming out to my brother, but I hadn't done it yet. I imagined that I would probably go into the room and address it, and he would probably be really disgusted because he was constantly making fun of the way I talked and the way I held myself. I walked into his room and he was like, close the door. So I closed the door and I was like, oh God. And I think as I was closing the door, he said, I am too. I was just livid with rage. I just thought it was the sickest joke he could have possibly pulled. And I was just started shaking and sobbing. And I was like, that's not funny. That's like the sickest joke you could have possibly told me.
So I had to go around my room and show him all these pictures of these guys that I had to like prove to him, like, look, don't you understand? Like, I'm gay. I had been relying on this idea that my brother was going to provide my parents with grandchildren. I was going to be the nice gay uncle who would play with the grandchildren. And of course, Dan figured the same thing about me. So,
how you could have thought that about me is like, I
was
still
completely oblivious.
Never understand that.
Afterwards, I think Dan said that he assumed that I knew and that Mom suspected. He was sort of one step over. Mom didn't have a clue, and I sort of suspected maybe.
When Dan came out to us, and he was the first to come out, I mean, I was a mess, and cried for several days. All I kept thinking about was myself. How am I going to tell my friends? How am I going to deal with this? When it suddenly hit me, that maternal feeling set in, and I thought, this they dealt with by themselves, alone, in fear of themselves, without me. In my vision for him as a mother, your expectations that he would marry, in our case, a nice Jewish girl, settle down, have children, da-da-da, that vision is gone. And so you almost have to bury that vision and invent a new vision for yourself. That now my child is gay, and my vision for him is to have a wonderful life as a gay human being.
we have the best parents in the world.
They're pretty much the best parents in the world.
They're the best parent. You see, yeah, my eyes are watering.
It's over the top how supportive our parents are of us.
To tell you the truth, I didn't know very much about what it was to be gay. We went to someone, a professional, to learn what it is to lead a gay life so we could prepare. And she went into explicit detail that we could have done without, to talk about things that we didn't really want to hear so that we would understand our children.
My dad has devoted, I guess, years at this point to making our local public school system safe for queer kids.
Years ago, the mental health profession came to understand that a large amount of substance abuse and suicide resulted from the agony inflicting gay youth believing they were defective and could never be accepted in society. I think if our kids had been told in health class that, well, you know, some people are gay and it's not a disease, it's just the way some people are, could have made a world of difference for them. You know, Dan, fortunately, made the decision to like himself rather than to just dissent. Thank goodness.
Time appreciating his music. I've gone through my whole life and I've never said the F word. And if I can go through my whole life and never saying the F word, I would think my kids could do the same. Where the f*** are they? Where the f*** are they? Where the f*** are they?
They're in LA.
I still think that my family is way gayer than I am.
Oh, right.
I think that I'm queerer than they are, but they are gayer than I am. Like, they have dedicated their lives, thank God, to making the world safe for gay people and for talking about gayness as this very intelligible idea. But I'm much more interested in queer people and queer ideas. Let's do lipstick and powder.
Have I understood his being gay? Absolutely. No problems with being gay. Do I understand the bad language? No. Do I understand the clothes and the getup and the outfit and the shaving his hair and all of that? No. I mean, I'm a mother. How I can only go so far. Will I get there someday? Hopefully. It's part of the journey.
Michael Judge, the charismatic chaplain of New York City's fire department, became known around the world after his tragic death on September the 11th, 2001. During his life, everyone who knew Father Mike was aware of his vitality, sense of humor, and compassion. But many were not aware that he was also a gay man struggling with his sexuality. Tonight, in memory of the 5th anniversary of his death, In the Life features poignant excerpts from the documentary Saint of 9/11.
Michael's life was still very alive to the people who knew him. And I wanted to make sure that a film could honor that life truly and faithfully. And after his death, there were a lot of different people who had different ideas about who Michael was. In fact, the working title of the film, up until we came up with Saint of 9/11, was My Michael. Because every time I would interview somebody, they would say, well, my Michael, da-da-da-da-da.
I remember one of Michael's own Franciscan brothers saying to me, you cannot tell Michael's story without also sharing his journey as a gay man.
That's why this film needed to be made. This film needed to be made to embrace the fullness of his life and not shy away from any part of his life and not be scared by any part of his life, but to say, this is this terrific, terrific man, a fantastic priest, and look at all the elements of his personality. And isn't he a good man?
Stay in today, don't get into tomorrow. All about God in our lives. It's just absolutely fantastic. It's fantastic how I can sometimes begin a day and go through a day and hopefully say a prayer here and there, but not realize that everything that happens, every single thing that happens is somehow within the divine plan.
Michael told a reporter, "The life I have is not what I planned on, but I had no idea of what life I'd have. You just don't know, so you just go and take one day at a time. I live in today as best I can for the glory of God and his people."
When Michael was younger, he was in a monastery. It was winter, and Michael was looking down the street, and there was a bad snowstorm. And Michael said, I was looking out the window and just standing there in my pajamas. And his roommate, who he liked a lot, got up and came over to the window and stood there. They were both meditating, looking out the window, feeling so close to each other. And Michael said, I could feel the heat from his nose. I could hear him breathing. And he said, I don't think he was an inch away from my body. And we stood there for 2 hours, just standing and staring. Finally, the other monk went to bed and Michael went to bed. Nothing happened. The next morning, Michael went down to breakfast, and they noticed that the other monk that he had shared the room with wasn't there. So they all started looking for this guy, and somebody said, Michael, maybe he went back to the room and isn't well. When Michael went back to the room, the man's habit and rosary beads and rope was laying on the bed, on Michael's bed. And the man had left the church.
One part of Michael's personhood is his sexuality. And it was something he wasn't afraid to talk about because it humanized him. It was out of that need and that want that we all have to connect, to touch, to feel. That was what empowered him, in good part, to be such an effective minister.
He wanted to be a minister to the whole world. In his day, in the 1980s, you could not publicly announce yourself as gay and remain an acceptable minister in the straight world. That was not possible. So he had to make a choice to remain publicly closeted and only to come out of the closet to those who would understand and accept him in his gayness.
It was during the AIDS crisis, which probably challenged Michael to address his own journey as a gay man and being priest. Michael could have chosen to remain a closeted man and to play the clerical game.
It was the early 80s, and we met for dinner at the Sheridan Square Diner in New York. And Michael asked me what I did besides travel. And I told him that I was working with the gay men's health crisis. And Michael wanted me to explain that to him. So I said to him that this issue of GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, was really becoming a problem, and that each one of us would take 3 or 4 or 5 patients. They were really shut-ins. They couldn't go out, and they needed counseling and just another person in their lives because so many people abandoned them. People of their good friends were worried that they were going to catch whatever it was that they had.
It broke my heart to be in a room with a patient who was suffering intensely, was in a darkened room because of sensitivity to the light, in total isolation, red flags all over his door, almost as if he was some kind of a disease himself. And a door would open without any knocking, and a tray would be pushed in on a wheeling table by someone from dietary who was wearing double robes and double layers of gloves. It was just such a fear. It created such a sense of indignity and non-caring.
And I told Michael my patient is very sick and that they had removed an eye and that they had removed his testicles. And they, in those days, I think maybe they thought they could cut it off or cure it or remove it like a cancer. But anyway, I said to Michael, my patient would really like to talk to a gay priest. And Michael sort of blanched. He was so shocked. He said that's the moment that it clicked. That he drove back to New Jersey, and he suddenly realized what God wanted him to do. When Michael went home that night, he noticed people in New York City. He noticed that he had to be in the Mecca. He felt very isolated. He felt that he could do so much more for people. That was a turning point for him. The next day in the morning, Michael came over in his habit, and he had the ropes and the full sandals and the whole outfit. He walked into the hospital, and the strangest thing happened because Michael didn't put on a mask. And here was this poor guy who had body parts removed, and Michael went in and kissed him on the lips.
You think about the man who he held and what that moment must have been like, having been sort of at that time in our country's history, in our world's history, what we thought about AIDS and how no one wanted to be near somebody, and the fact that this man would not only shake your hand or give you a hug, but to pick you up and to kiss you and to rock you as you do a child. It's very, very profound.
That scene actually reminds me of the story of St. Francis, where he literally where St. Francis gets off his horse when he sees the leper and embraces and kisses the leper.
I think it was before a month had gone by, Michael said to me, I talked to my superiors and I want to come back to New York City. I want to be with the poor. I want to be with the homeless. I want to be with the people sick with AIDS. And he really got into it. He just came over and he couldn't see enough. He became the priest walking through the ward at St. Vincent's Hospital. He became very involved with the gay men's health crisis. He was very involved at fundraisers. His presence was just seen.
He would go to the hospitals and look up people dying of AIDS and go into their room, and very frequently he would be rejected because they would see a church figure and see the church as their enemy. And legitimately so at the time, what the hierarchy were saying and doing. And this really hurt him. He wanted to bring the messages of God love, and they refused to speak to him. It wouldn't have anything to do with him, you know? And it really pained him terribly. And so he told me he prayed very hard, asking God to tell him how to get around that hostility and that rejection and be able to perform his task. And he told me one day that he found the answer. He would take holy oil, sacred chrism, into the hospital room, and before he talked to the person, he would roll back the blankets and massage his feet. Even if they had Kaposi sarcoma and blemishes, he would spend a good time massaging their feet and then talk to them. And almost every time he did that, the hostility would fall away, and he was able to enter into a spiritual conversation.
After anointing Ron, Michael went on with some of the prayers of the Mass and got to the point of communion and gave communion to each of us, then put the chalice down on the table and bent over and picked Ron up in his arms and just held him to himself and rocked and kissed him on the head. I will never forget it, because that man had said to me so many times, Mary, does God hate me? And I'd always say, sweetheart, God could not hate you. He cherishes you. He made you who you are, and he loves who you have become. And here was Michael standing in for God, holding him in his arms and crooning to him.
He didn't have to do that. But I think he really had love for people and really understood what love was.
Michael celebrated the funeral Mass and began by facing the family, Ron's parents, who, after all, had struggled for a lifetime with a very unusual son and who had a lot of cultural reasons to feel uncomfortable about who Ron was. And Father Michael stood there and looked right down at them with the most tender and caring expressions and mentioned them by name and said, how proud you must be. And all I could think of was, this is the first priest I've ever heard tell the parents of a gay boy that you should be proud of him. The most I'd ever heard anyone do was try to tell them how to cope and not blame themselves. This was so totally different. And Michael went on to say what a great gift Ron was to the family, and that their whole family would be forever blessed by the love that Larry and Ron had shared.
I don't think any of us knew at that time, least of all Michael, of the power that he was bringing to the spirituality that he was bringing to a community that really needed it.
You do what God has called you to do. You show up, you put one foot in front of another, you get on the rig, and you go out and you do the job, which is a mystery and a surprise. You have no idea when you get on that rig, no matter how big the call, no matter how small, you have no idea what God's calling you to. But he needs you. He needs me. He needs all of us. going. Keep supporting each other. Be kind to each other. Love each other. Work together. You love the job. We all do. What a blessing that is. A difficult, difficult job. And God calls you to it, and then he gives you a love for it, so that a difficult job will be well done.
Life and death. So valuable. And you wonder when my last half hour is going to be, or my last hour, what it'll be. Will it be doing something for someone, trying to save a life?
This is how Michael would have prayed to have had the last day of his life transpire, doing what he loved. This was one of the most horrific moments in American history, and he would have been nowhere else on the face of the earth but with all those folks. Michael wasn't a hero in 9/11. He was doing his job.
Thank you for watching In the Life. To sign up for monthly air date alerts or to find out how you can get involved, visit the In the Life website at inthelife.tv.org or call 1-800-627-ON-TV. I'm Alan Cumming. For all of us at In the Life, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next month. Funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by the Ford Foundation, the Pride Foundation, and these funders. And the annual support of In the Life members like you.
This is WCNY.
89-year-old Doris Haddock, whose nickname is Granny D, is trying to draw attention to the need for campaign finance reform.
My interest in her was sparked by her walk across America. I mean, it's one of the more remarkable feats in American political history.
Tuesday night at 11 here on WCNY.